Alrighty, welcome. It is time to begin. It is Tuesday, May 5th, and we are here for our final Lunch and Learn presentation. And we are so excited to welcome Dr. Anita Pandey. She is a professor of applied linguistics, writing, and teacher at Morgan State University, and she is the interim director of the Writing Center. We are so excited to have you here today. Thank you for sharing your presentation with us. We are recording today's lecture and it will be available on the Mile YouTube page by the end of the week. So go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. This compendium of slides is more a reflection of my thoughts. There's a lot of research on reading from a cognitive standpoint, from a language standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, because reading is, as we know, multidimensional. So my title reflects questions that I have. I don't know if I have the answers for you, but I want you to ponder them alongside me. Is skimming cheating? Spotlight on schema and reading. When I first talked about skimming in one of my classes this semester, I remember Alan Sneed, one of my saxophonist majors, he said, "Oh, are you talking about this particular movie?" And we'll get to that movie where you skim the skimmers. And that's where I got the title, where it's a form of cheating in the Italian mafia world, because skimming, as we shall see, is a word, and that's why skim milk came about, from the idea that you take milk and you beat it up until the fat goes on top, and the fat is what is the healthiest part of milk. So in ancient Indus Valley civilizations, people would feed the fat to the children, and because their brains need that gray matter. And so you know that preschoolers and kindergartners especially need a lot of fatty foods, including full fat milk. So the idea of skimming is taking from the top. And as a strategy, it goes back to this idea of what's on top, primarily, but we started using it for what's at the bottom too. The word alphabet, anybody has any idea where it comes from? Any thoughts on where the word alphabet comes from?
Is it
Uh,
Arabic?
yes, it's Arabic. Some say it's Greek. I would say Arabic precedes Greek in terms of writing system. And so alphabet also could be from Hebrew, aleph, bet, as you can see, I've put it here. So alpha and beta is the first one here at the bottom left is from Greek. Aleph and ba is from Arabic, and then aleph and aleph, just different variations of Hebrew and Arabic, but they all came from the Phoenician script. And so here we go. We have a lot of scrollers here, including denim. So I've been watching young kids. They can barely sit up, but they are able to scroll. And this is the first view of technologically based reading, the scrollers. This kid, when he was 2, you couldn't take his device away from him. He would get irritated. And he was scrolling before he could pick up an instrument. So if you're looking at early reading, because the national reading tests typically are conducted in 3rd grade. And so P to 3 is where we're trying to train children to start beginning to the cultural habits of reading, because reading is arguably a cultural practice. So when you're looking for books in students' homes and in preschoolers' homes, you have to understand that literacy is a cultural practice. There is something called oral literacy that is emphasized in oral cultures, including many African American homes and communities, African communities. I was born and raised in Africa, so we were using oracy. So story time was important to us. We actually were not made to read until like age 6 and 7. This is common also in Sweden and in Finland, where children are first taught to speak and engage in conversation. And then they are taught to read and look for spoken language and reading. In the US in the last decade, there's been a move to introduce reading very early, to the point of almost introducing it too early before even the child has developed a good uh, oral fluency capability. And so we see a little bit of tension there. We also have apps like My Baby Can Read. You see a lot of babies in cribs being given books, and they're literally eating up the books. I remember by the time Goodnight Moon was read to my second child, it was already halfway eaten because of a teething child. And so we can see why books are literally eaten. But long story short, there are listening components involved in reading and speaking. There is a speech involved in order to make readings come to life. And so when the Reverend Jesse Jackson was on Saturday Night Live reading Dr. Seuss, and he took out his glasses to read, and you can watch that on your own. It's really hilarious. And he makes it so animated and makes it come to life. You know that children are more responsive if they hear the books said out loud and if they're read to. And then, of course, they have to understand writing. And writing is very complicated in English, which makes English reading and writing some of the most complex in the world. And cases of dyslexia are far more in English than in any other language, which makes me wonder, as a linguist, is it the individual that's dyslexic, or is it the language that's dyslexic? So I want you to ponder that for a moment. So because we are living in a technologically advanced era, and each generation feels like technology is getting more and more complex, and with generative AI, we are going to put technology on the, so everything now is foregrounded in technology. So you have the speech and the bilingual bidialectal aspect, the visual aspect of reading, and then the writing aspect. And I say it's bilingualized, not just historically speaking, because English has borrowed from the Phoenician script and the Greek and the Roman script, namely Latin. So there are different, and we'll talk about the complications of that. And yet, vocabulary-wise, it has borrowed, and mathematically speaking, it has borrowed from the Indus Valley civilization. And yet, in terms of the writing, we write in a way that does not necessarily, it's sort of anglicized vocabulary. So even though we have over 20,000 words that look French and that actually clearly came directly from French, we have begun to pronounce them in the anglicized way. And yet you can trace these words back to another language. I put this picture on the top left to represent the American and the Western idea that books represent graduation and success and apples. Let me tell you this. I was born and raised in Africa. First time I actually was required to read, like I said, was fairly late. And books were not allowed in our beds because my parents were very obsessive compulsive about germs. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that library books have more germs than the inside of a toilet. And so I didn't realize that. And so now I can see the point of my parents not wanting us to bring books that are library books into our beds. But also they didn't let us write in books because in most Indian languages, writing and knowledge is supposed to be elevated. So you can't put books on the floor. If by any chance you put books on the floor or paper falls down, you're supposed to literally pick it up and put on your forehead, because it's called pop. And can you write this down the way you hear it, Courtney? P-A-P or P-A-A-P. It's a term in most, about 800 Indian languages that means you are desecrating writing. But there is no translation equivalent in English. And that is because writing systems, as we know, predate Western languages. And so, for example, Sanskrit, which is the mother language of the Indo-European language family, was written about 5,000 years ago. And so there are references to writing, and those texts are considered very knowledgeable, just like all ancient texts. So here we have a quick outline. I wanted to thank the MILE team. My hypothesis in this talk is that the language of reading matters. In other words, it influences the outcomes. And we'll talk about language. What do I mean by language? Visual language, spoken language, written language. And of course, dissecting language further, that it's not just vocabulary that is confounding to a lot of students, etymologically speaking, but also sentence structure and voice, which is often overlooked in theories of reading. So key considerations include writing system, syntax, or sentence structure, the age at which children acquire certain structures. We need to consider that. So for example, passive voice is not acquired until around age 11. And yet a lot of third grade and second grade books are using passive voice. And yet, because a lot of book evaluators are not language experts, they look at the pictures and they look at the content, but they don't look at the language. They rate books as award-winning books, but they don't necessarily realize that the language is not age appropriate in terms of the sentence structure. And so this is the point of this presentation. Uppercase versus lowercase. Not all writing systems have uppercase and lowercase, the source of the words. And then, of course, we'll look at some reading theories, some findings, some common obstacles to reading, some strategies. And I want to thank my students. I've been polling them informally on whether, at what age they were first reading on their own, who read to them, what they read to. And there's a lot of variation. And this is not surprising because most of our students at Morgan State University come from oral families, oral history generations, and homes where storytelling and verbal communication is the first and foremost. Developing oracy is key. And books are not necessarily, the practice of going to the library is sort of a middle class practice. Going to a museum, understanding academic language. And in the United States, there has been an emphasis on vocabulary. And so we went from wordly wise, so that kind of vocabulary, to words in context or sentences, but we're still fixated on vocabulary. And we're going to talk about how that is not necessarily the best approach to yielding reading success. So as you saw in the call, these are some of the objectives. I want to demonstrate that everyday reading for most students at all ages is multimodal. So they're scrolling on their devices, they're reading images, they're reading music, they're reading sounds, they're reading a combination. We're getting our information. And I want to ask the audience here, how many of you are reading mostly multimodally every day? Mostly, put a yes if you're getting most of your information from the internet. On a daily basis, put a Y in the chat or raise your hands. So if you are in multimodal reading mode, in other words, you're reading on a daily basis, primarily in multimodal, like seeing visuals, hearing videos, and you're getting most of your information in multimodal mechanism. Also, that when we decode language, we need to think that language is not just textual, but it's also visual. And for a lot of our visual learners, if you don't have pictures in the books, they're going to be off-putting. Even a lot of my undergraduate students have shared that chapter books were avoided by most of them because they seemed intimidating. Harry Potter books, like almost 1,000 pages, forget about those, according to some of the students. And I remember, was it Marvin? Marvin, I know you're here. Was it you who said you really liked Diary of a Wimpy Kid? Marvin?
Yes.
Yes? I believe I heard Marvin saying yes. Am I right, Marvin? You said that you enjoyed it, and because it seemed humorous, it had pictures, right? And it seemed like something. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, I'm in class, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Oh boy. If you're in class, you're going to get in trouble for listening in. So you don't have to worry. You can just focus on your class. But thank you for attempting to join today. Really appreciate that. But yeah, Marvin and several other students mentioned to me that writing Diary of a Wimpy Kid was one of the first fun books because it seemed comical. It had visuals. It was easy to get through. And so the idea of success in reading should consider all these elements to appeal to different learning styles. So reading out loud or having students read out loud. Subconscious reading is very difficult for a lot of students. I informally polled my students, and most of them shared that there's so many distractions in our mind that to be able to focus, because our attention spans are constantly compromised by information overload and all the things we have to do and all the technological gadgets that are appealing to us and all the things that are constantly on our mind, it compromises subconscious reading. So when you read out loud, it's a lot easier. The visual elements make things easy. The kinetic, sort of like the group concept, the idea of a peer or a buddy. And then, of course, the language of the reading matters. And I also want to mention that vocabulary should not be the key emphasized. Multimodal readings and instructional approaches and tools could improve outcomes significantly. So it's not just one size fits all. And we will end with some strategies. So here's an example of math. For those of you who didn't know, we actually got our numbers from the Indus Valley civilization. This is how they looked originally in Sanskrit. And of course, in Hindi, we have a Kashmiri linguist here. Dr. Dhar, you're joining us from Kashmir. Welcome. What time is it in Kashmir now? I believe it's about 11 hours ahead of us, right, Dr. Dhar? And if you cannot speak right now, don't worry, but welcome. And I don't know much about Kashmiri, but this is the source of the India, the mathematics that we use today. The term for zero is called shunya, spelt in Sanskrit this way. And the number zero, the source of mathematics, came from the Indian mathematician Aryabhata, who wrote his first math book in the 3rd century before Common Era. The word algebra comes from Arabic, exposed to the Western world by this mathematician, which means the, and I'm massacring his name, so I'm not going to try to massacre it. But algebra, which is algebra, is the reunion of broken parts. It was used as a process of healing when people, as mostly travelers, because the Arab trade in the Indus Valley started around 600 years before the arrival of the European colonists well, actually, that's not true because the Greeks came first. So the Bactrian Greeks went to the Indus Valley around the time of Chandragupta Maurya, which would have been the Bronze and Iron Age. And they ended with Alexander the Great and his general, Seleucus, marrying his daughter Helena, marrying Chandragupta Maurya. And then the Greeks then adopted mathematical concepts and adopted the Indus Valley language. And so Greek is the oldest Indo-European language. But as you can see, I'm going to say these words in Hindi, ek, do, teen, char, panch, chhe, saat, aat, nav. And you can see how they have now become the basis. And this is where I got the title from, the casino movie, where the skimmers are skimming. And look at the milk here in the Indus Valley civilization and in most Nepali, Indian, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankan, Fijian, and Trinidadian, and even Jamaican Indian influenced diaspora cultures, you see lassi. And the word malai is the top, the cream that is the most important part of a lot of dishes, including malai kofta. So if you go to an Indian restaurant, you will notice malai dishes are common. But so here we go. This is a preschool report of one of my biggest fans. Her name is Valeria. Now she is in 4th grade. I had the honor of being with her constantly. In fact, I would visit her every day and look at her report card for pre-K. This I have shared with permission. But let me just read the last part. At home, continue to work with Valeria on writing her first name with a model and identifying the uppercase letters, and she gives out the orchid letters N and F, and giving her opportunities to increase her English vocabulary with activities such as name items in a store, reading books together, etc. This quarter in math, Valeria has been working towards counting concrete objects up to 5. Valeria will continue to work towards the goal next quarter as well. Great job this quarter, Valeria. All right. Now, I just wanted to bring this up because, of course, I went to her graduation, preschool graduation. They only had one extra ticket for anybody other than family, and I got invited. So it was really, really an honor for me. So here we are at preschool graduation. And why do I bring up this uppercase? If you give uppercase to children who are learning to write versus a lowercase, you will find that they have an easier time writing lowercase. So it is a misconception that we need to start with uppercase. And this is because even in technical writing courses, I emphasize this. Uppercase is harder to read. It is harder to draw straight lines and angles than it is to draw curves. You notice here with the uppercase, she is writing B like an 8. With the lowercase, she has no trouble at all. This is a 3-year-old who had to copy for me. Her name is Sophia. I don't have time to play her voice, but I have it recorded. And if I were to play it for you and ask her, ¿cuál era más fácil para ti? ¿La grande o la chiquita? And she'll say, la chiquita. And I'll say, why? And her answer is, porque era más fácil. Es más fácil. Fácil is the Spanish word for facile, which is a word we don't even learn. Facility. Um, and even you can see faculties eventually. So the ease with which we master things. So we can see the Spanish roots, the Latin roots, because Spanish is the closest. So this idea that we need to start with uppercase, I think we need to rethink that and let the child start with lowercase if that is something easier for them. So I want to draw attention to this book, Language Building Blocks, which I was inspired to write this because of a grant that I got. And this child of mine in the cover page here, her name is Sahara, which means helper. She helped me apply for this grant, which is the national grant from the Association for Children and Families at Health and Human Services. And I printed it out and she helped me annotate it. She was about 2 at that time. And because she picked this particular one to annotate, I decided I would apply for that grant. So she brought me good luck. And I ended up getting a grant I called my project ABCDE, Accelerating Baltimore Children's Development Through Education is what the ABCD stood for. And my goal in that grant was to give preschool teachers, particularly Head Start teachers, the opportunity to get a degree in early childhood or special education in 2.5 years with one course at a time. And the result of that was this book. To make language easy and fun for teachers, because we fixate on words. And this is the problem. We need to understand that sounds are meaningful. This is especially true in African American speech, where sounds have very specific meanings. So if you read the book by Jacqueline, and I'm forgetting her last name, We Had a Picnic This Sunday Past, You Should Have Been There. The grandma said, and it is written HM in the book when the pastor shows up empty-handed to the picnic. And that means a lot. What does it mean? It means, oh, there you go again. Of course, he's going to show up empty-handed with a big appetite. It's almost like she's being sarcastic. So sounds cannot be overlooked. They're very, very meaningful, including We know that in Southern speech, can have a lot of meanings. Mother Marcy, could you give us some of the meanings of Like if you're telling a story or if you're agreeing or disagreeing with somebody, the sounds are meaningful.
Yeah. When I say means, oh, okay, I see. It means a lot of things, just like you said. So that's because if depending on what it is, you say, I'm wondering. That's a wandering sound. Wondering what's really going on.
And when you're being sarcastic and they show up empty-handed to a picnic with a big appetite, what are you going to say? There you go. And what does that mean?
That means, oh, really?
There you go. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. My point exactly. A lot of the kids who are reading, they're being inundated with vocabulary, and yet They're being surrounded in their homes with meaningful sounds and a lot of nonverbal communication. My students and I, we laugh about this. When you think about your mother or grandma, and her communication, it's the stare eye, the slant eye,
Mm.
the give me some of the eyes. Let's label them, Mother Marcy or anybody. Go ahead, Mother Marcy. Give us some of the eyes that the mother is communicating with.
The staring eye means
Okay.
stop whatever you're doing.
Uh-huh. What else?
The squinting eye means you better watch
Uh-huh.
out. What are you doing?
Uh-huh. Somebody write
Oh,
this in the chat for us, please. And then give us some more of the
um,
eyes. Looking at my belt, eye.
hmm.
That's not the
And see,
staring
I
eye.
use my eyes. I use eyes in the mouth all the time.
The eye.
Eyes in the mouth, and they all know what everything means. If I pierce my lips, it means, okay, you're in trouble. But they'll have the eyes that look like the angry eye.
The
Okay, you're
angry
in
eye.
trouble. Yes.
Thank you. So this is the thing. And we don't look, we're not even covering that in reading classes. And this is a big gap, the visual language that is meaningful language. So if readings are not visually enhanced in terms of cultural relevancy, then reading is going to be off-putting. Then I put down below sounds is something called morphemes in language studies. It literally, I broke it down for you. It's a word from Greek. And we have a Greek speaker here. Stefania, are you here with us? She's our writing center tutor. Stefania? So what does morpheme mean in Greek that you understand this word? Uh, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but the word morphology comes from Greek. So it has to do with the science of a morphing composition. So basically words coming together. So girl is one. Girls, when you add an S, it changes the meaning. So for example, I went to the store. I I go to the store every day to buy milk. I went to the store. How many meaning parts are in I go to the store? Just one, go. How many meaning parts are in went? Two. Go plus pastness. So think in terms of meaning. Don't think in terms of uh, alphabet. Think in terms of
Let me see what
meaning.
you have. Oh,
So can somebody write this in the chat? Go is equal to one meaning part. Went is equal to two meaning parts. Go plus pastness.
leave her stuff alone. You can put that.
And now we're going to put you on mute, mute everybody. And then we have words. Do you know that idioms are words? And American English is famous for idioms. I didn't realize this until a conference attendee in India at a conference I went to, and I hadn't been to India for like 20 years because, as I told you, I was born and raised in Africa. First time I saw an apple was when I was 6. My father was on a teacher's salary, so my mother and father had to raise 4 children. They could not afford to buy air tickets for all 4 children to go to India every year. It was very expensive. So once every 4 years, my teacher father would get to take us to India because as part of his contract, he had free airline tickets for the family once every 4 years to his home country because teachers were treated like kings and queens in Africa. And in the bulk of the world, teachers get the highest salaries, higher than computer programmers and higher than doctors and pharmacists. But in the US, it is the opposite. Even though all things evolve from teaching, we underpay our teachers. Just something to ponder about. And so words and idioms. He said, "How is it technically possible to sit up and sit down at the same time?" I said, "You got me." He said, "What did you get me?" I said, "Oh my goodness, I have become so idiom centric. I'm using so many idioms, I don't realize that they are so American." And so we have to break down idioms and try to avoid using them for a lot of students, especially special needs students, because many special needs students, I don't want to lump all special needs students together, but if you are on the spectrum, you typically will take things literally. And so you may want to avoid using idioms, because I remember a teacher once shared with me that she had two students, and she said to one, David, you got it. And he was so excited because he thought he found something. And then she said it to the next student, and David started crying. And she asked David, like, why are you crying? And he said, but I got it first. So why do you say he got it? I got it first. And she realized that the idiom you got it, he was taking it literally. And so, and then we have phrases like verb phrases like step in, step up, step out. These have very specialized meanings as opposed to, and then we have clauses and then sentences. Clauses are very important in physics and mathematics and logic, where you have to put forward a proposition, if X, then Y. And then within sentences, it's not just simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. It is a lot more complex than that. And words are not just monosyllabic and polysyllabic. Did you know that polysyllabic words are a lot easier for a lot of Latin speaking students, Latinate speaking students? So, for example, the word fabricate, can somebody put that in the chat? It comes from fabricar in Spanish and fabricate in Latin, to create. So fabricate is how we now say to make up things. But fabricate is a very easy word for a 5-year-old Spanish speaker. Signify is a very easy word for a 4-year-old Spanish speaker because it means signify, it means significa, which means mean. So it's not just the length of the word that makes a word easy or complex. It is the familiarity of that child with certain language roots. So we need to think about complexity of a word in the context of the language. And then, of course, sentences. It's not just questions, directives, clause, and passive voice, active voice. We'll talk about the complexity of this in mathematics and content areas. And there's something called discourse, which is what we call the functions of language. And they're very unique to many cultures. So, for example, call and responding cultures like African American English, where every act of communication it involves a speaker and a listener. So if that is not mimicked in reading, like it is not uh there is no responsivity or allowed responsivity, and you're silencing these young kids and making them sit crisscross applesauce with their bocas, which is where vocabulary came from, their lips, their mouths shut. Vocabulary came from boca, which is from Latin, and you see it in Spanish, boca. If you are doing that, you are actually silencing the child. The child is meant to run, talk, right? And so we need to understand that. It wasn't until I came to the United States that I was literally silenced at a public library in Chicago working on my master's degree. I was whispering, and the librarian came to me and said, could you please keep it down and use your inside voice? And I thought, what is inside voice? I never had heard of that term. So I have been talking in many elementary schools and even high schools and middle schools and say we should put on the walls that we're proud to be loud, because in the United States there is so much discrimination against loudness. We uh, we give tickets to individuals if their music is too loud. We say someone is too loud. We say someone is angry if their voice is at a certain decibel level, or if their tone or their pitch is considered antagonizing. These are all cultural misconceptions. How many of you would agree with me? Raise your hands if you agree or disagree. When I ask teachers in Mexico what makes a classroom demonstrative of learning, when I ask teachers in Jordan, in Egypt, versus in mainstream US classes, I get very different responses. In Jordan, the louder the class, the more the learning that's taking place, because teachers, when they call on students, it's because they have to compete to answer a question. They have to say, teacher, pick me, teacher, pick me. Also, the idea of interruption is culturally different. So if you ever watch sports like soccer, and I'm a big soccer fan, and you know the World Cup is going to start at the end of this month, starting in New Jersey with Brazil and Argentina. And I was shocked the tickets are over $1,000. So obviously I can't get to go. But You'll notice there's a show on YouTube that monitors all the Spanish teams and almost every league. It's called Chiringuito. And just listen to it for 5 seconds and you'll see what I'm talking about. Everybody is talking over everybody. And the louder you are, the greater your chances of being heard. So this idea of interruption, teaching, it's all cultural practice, turn taking. This is where discourse comes in, teaching students to take your turn, to ask to speak. All of this is cultural and it is taught. So inside voice versus outside voice. I know that if you've ever watched the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, you'll notice that the Greeks use the sound ftu ftu. It comes from the serpent in the Bible, I believe, and Stefania can correct me if I'm wrong, where you kind of you negate the powers of the serpent with your own spit. So we see this concept in Arabic. It's called hasad, of the evil eye. And I had students from the past from Yemen and Saudi Arabia and UAE, and they would say that hasad is a cultural practice, and oftentimes it just means that, you could offset it with things like maybe pouring coffee over things or negating it. And the color black it seems to be very powerful in the Indus Valley civilization. So you see the avatar, the word avatar means reincarnation. All of the avatars are drawn in black or blue. And even in the Arab world, the word black, it seems to symbolize energy and power. So even the concept of color and the complexion of color and the denotations and connotations of words are very important and they're culturally imbued. Um, uh, and yet we see historically with English, the word black has been denigrated due to, again, European, Eurocentric forces at work. And so these are culture specific concepts that we cannot translate into English. The reason I put them here is because readings that bring in other languages and other dialects of English or Spanish can very likely make students interested in reading. When I poll my students and younger students, they often tell me that reading seems so boring and lifeless without different voices. I remember Alan, one of my students who ended up becoming a musician and is now a saxophonist and studying music. He was saying that when his pops used to read, and that's his word, pops, he used to read it in a monotone as opposed to with different voices. It didn't make reading come to life. Out of my kids, one of them hated reading, one of them loved reading. And the one that hated reading, namely Sahara, she hated reading all her life until there was a teacher who read every book in different voices, different accents, different dialects. And that is when the joy of reading suddenly entered her. I remember that day because I went to pick her up, and usually she would just walk like she was in a trance, like she hated school. So, what did you learn? Nothing. You must have learned something. Well, the teacher didn't call on me again. I had my hand up, and she still didn't call on me. And I'd say, well, but this day she ran towards and she said, Mommy, I love reading. And I said, really? Because the 20-minute charge of the school of reading a day was a nightmare. And so what I had to end up doing for the 20 minutes was to put reading books everywhere in the house, including in the bathroom, which was her favorite place to read and write. And that's how we accomplished the 20-minute requirement. Or I would just bilingualize the books. And that's when she suddenly started paying attention. But it was that teacher. And that teacher who put in the different accents also used 5 languages that day because there were 5 students from 5 different language backgrounds: Spanish, Hindi, Arabic, Chinese, Korean. And the teacher used all 5 languages in the reading. Every child, I'm sure, went home that excited that day because the teacher made the reading culturally relevant. And that is the secret. So then, of course, we have sentences, phrases that we cannot translate. And this one from Nigerian English, my wife, which is a compliment. And I just wanted to share that in passing because when I was living in Nigeria, and I was 7 when we moved there, um, but the first time, like I told you, I tried an apple was 6. And yet we saw it in the alphabet song because A was for alphabet, but there were no apples grown in Africa except in South Africa. And we were neighbors with South Africa because I was born in a country neighboring South Africa, but we could not import apples because of apartheid. And so when I went to India at age 6, and my parents introduced, bought an apple right outside the airport, and they tried an apple. I said, "Oh, how about them apples? They were so tasty, different colors." Then I come to the United States and try gala apples and yellow apples and mushy apples. And I hear there are also diamond apples in Nepal that I want to try. They're purple. Haven't tried them. But I learned very quickly, not having been exposed to apples, that A is not just for apple. And that's the first thing we need to make clear. And I'll give you an example of how it was when I started teaching my mother English in second grade. We were living in this country that was attracting people from all over the world. And my mother was ashamed because she didn't speak English. So she asked me to teach her English. And this was me, a child who would bring home a report card that would make her parents yell at her because apparently I wasn't doing well in school. I thought I was doing pretty well. I mean, if I was number 13 in a class of 15, that's got to mean something. I was better than at least two students, right? And so they were yelling at me. And so finally, she asked me to teach her English in grade 2. And that's when I took a look at the alphabet song and I realized A is not just for apple. A makes 6 different sounds. And I created my own alphabet song. And all of a sudden, at the end of that year, I brought home a report card where I was number 2 in the class of 15. So I guarantee you that being in the role of teacher made me do intentional reading, intentional writing, intentional teaching. And that's when my love for teaching was born. And I became a teacher, true to my name, Pandey, which means teacher in Sanskrit. But I really want us to think about words and phrases and vocabulary too, beyond um, mainstream interpretations. So, for example, conditionals have a very distinct meaning of threats. So, for example, in our business writing courses, we are told to teach students to avoid conditionals. So, rather than saying, if you do not pay your rent by Friday, which there's some consequence that's going to come after that, we're told to say, please pay your rent by Friday. But when I came to Morgan State University 22 years ago, I had to throw out all the textbooks for business writing because my students made me realize that that alone is not going to get the job done. Because if you say, please pay your rent by Friday, and if someone is financially compromised, they're not going to take you seriously. So the variable of seriousness entered the picture. It's not just politeness, but seriousness. Mainstream texts do not consider seriousness as a variable. My point exactly. Directives are considered antagonizing in the United States, so are questions. You notice that law enforcement is more likely to intimidate individuals who use questions and individuals who use directives. And yet, most of us, when we grow up and are trained, the models that we hear in our homes are mostly the language of commanding and directive language and questioning language. So there's something to be thought about here in terms of the conflicting language of the home and the school. What we notice in a lot of kindergartens, which I didn't go to kindergarten and preschool, is that we're teaching students democracy, so we use egalitarian language. And yet, in the homes of a lot of our students, the parents and the caregivers are using non egalitarian language. I want you to think about that for a second. So, statements versus questions, active voice versus passive, there's a lot of difference in meaning. So, if I say, Anita had uh, Denim, and I'm sorry, Denim, to use your name. Anita is a bad person if she hits Denim because she is the agent of the hitting. But if I say Denim's been hit, now I'm just talking about the outcome. I am not naming the hitter or the agent. So I'm downplaying the agent. And so it's very polite, but it's also not giving us the whole picture. So if you look at history books, and if you look at even the national declarations of Indigenous Peoples Day, and I was surprised at how many U.S. states still celebrate Indigenous Peoples. I mean, it's Columbus Day. They always use passive voice to not name the agents. They say Indigenous peoples were discriminated or subjected to blah. They never say who subjected Indigenous peoples to that kind of injustice. That is deflecting attention away from the facts of history. So we need to pay attention to sentence structure. And yet, this is a book that won an award from the Scottish uh, um, uh, Council of Readers, The Day Lewis Got Eaten. And this book is being read by 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds who have not necessarily gotten uh, a passive language. It's not been acquired. Just something to think about, okay? Here's a book that was given to a preschooler in North Carolina, and I visit there frequently. And then comes summer, and it won an award, okay? And I looked at this book, and I was struck by how complicated the language is. When bumblebees bumble around in flowers and warbles flit from tree to tree, I had done my bachelor's in English in Nigeria. I'd never heard of a warble. I had to look it up. It's a bird. And the air thrums, I never heard of the word thrums, with the sound of lawnmowers. Look at how complex this sentence is. Look at the visuals in this book. Not everybody knows what a warble is. Not everybody has a lawnmower or has white picket fence, or just something to think about, like the remoteness, the cultural remoteness of the vocabulary. So here's something to think about. Did you know that F and PH are spelt alike because William Caxton, the owner of the first printing press in South London, ran out of molds? Did you know that only 10% or even 12%, I would say less, of our vocabulary, that's approximately 2,000 words, I would argue even fewer, come from Anglo-Saxon, which is a runic script that is from the Angles and the Saxons who lived in what is present day known as England, because English was born as a contact language by immigrants to Inglaterra, basically for the language, the terra, Latin for tierra, um, by a contact with the Norwegians, the Scandinavians, the Danish, the Dutch, and the Germanic tribes. Then, of course, colonialism to other parts of the world. But all of our family words and numbers come from Sanskrit. So mother, father, sister. So mata becomes madre in Spanish. Father becomes, so pita becomes pater, and then father, sister, brother, daughter. Greek and Latin come from Sanskrit. Spanish is derived from, it has a lot from directly from Sanskrit, like tu, dunya, and a lot of words from Arabic, because the Arabs had contact with Indus Valley, and they went then to Africa and Europe, specifically Spain, and they took a lot of al words like ojalá, almuerza, almohada. So we see a lot of the synergy of languages. And just interesting, it's important to look at the etymology of words to make children very interested. Spanish is the closest ancestor, Latin. Spanish roots are in most science terms, so we would benefit by teaching preschoolers Spanish instead of eliminating Spanish like we usually do because of attitude and ignorance problems. Greek roots are in biological sciences. The word calendar comes from Sanskrit kal, which means time. It means yesterday, today, tomorrow. And the calendar was calculated by the Indian mathematician Aryabhata. The complications in reading English are upper versus lowercase. Punctuation is not sentence initial in English, unlike in Spanish. So it does not notify or announce the expected intonation until the end. So you have to be a mind reader, which makes no sense. So that's why I would suggest using Spanish punctuations in English. Perhaps they could increase reading comprehension and speed of reading. Syntax is not always age appropriate, and also we need to think about that. Here's a preschooler looking at a leapfrog card game, and she looks at the plum and she says, "Ew!" Can you see how she reads it like the bottom of somebody's, behind? She reads six as an E. Can you see that? Absolutely. So here's the alphabet song. I'm not going to sing it to you, that I came up with. So I noticed that my kids, for example, a lot of linguists have been tracking their kids, and they've been tracing how language is acquired. But I noticed that my kids started reading by writing and scribbling. But as you can see, that these are different sounds that E makes. In Spanish, we muddy the waters further by looking at the different shades of brown. Here in Indian English, this means literally specifically this Indonesian folktale. If if you don't have the background knowledge, you won't understand that the blood is not really blood. It is from betel nut, which is an indigenous plant in Bali and Java, Sumatra, India, Nepal, and it is consumed. And when people, it's like consumed with tobacco or with coconut and anise as a digestive. But when people spit it out, it looks like blood. So that's the schema. In this Indian in English comic book, you won't understand sacred thread unless you understand the meaning of it. Here's a quick look, and I think I have about 3 more minutes, right? Or 4 more minutes? How many minutes do I have left?
Yes, we'll be ending at 1 p.m., so you have 7
Okay.
minutes.
Oh, thank you. So just to look at Chinese for a minute here. Chinese is an ideographic, logographic language, idea-based, and you have to learn characters, not alphabets. And so you learn about 3,000 characters, and you put them together mathematically speaking. And if you look at Chinese, Korean, and even Indus Valley languages like Sanskrit, Hindi, Marathi, you'll notice the mathematics embedded in the languages. So, for example, if you know Arabic, you already know how to count. Once you know the Arabic script, you already know how to count to 900. The same for Greek. So if you're a preschooler, you're already learning to count. When you know your alphabet, you already know how to count to 900. If you know how to, the letters of Sanskrit or Hindi, Marathi, you already know how to add, subtract, and multiply by the time you learn your alphabet because of the way the alphabet is set up. And I'm not going to go into the numerological side of that, but the mathematical advantage of languages is very impressive, and that's for another talk. But look at how candy is sugar plus fruit. Computer is electric plus brain. Big brother is elder plus brother. Vegetables are, so fruits are water plus fruit. This is an example of the National Spelling Bee. And we see that the first African American child to win this was Zelaya Avant-Garde. She was 14 years old and she was asked to spell the word Mariah. Mariah is a word in biology. It's a flower. It looks like this. And the first reference to this is in the Old English Dictionary. And but it actually came from the Swedish German herbalist in 1771. You can see his writings. But if you look at the bulk of the spelling bee winners, they are of South Indian descent. That is because their languages are evident in these words that they're being asked to spell. This is something to think about very carefully. It's not genius. It is about the etymology of the words. So you will see these words. These are the words that they're being asked to spell. Look at the latest one from 2020. 2025 is French roots. Look at the one from 2021, first African American to win the National Spelling Bee. It is Mariah. And you see most of them are Latin based, or the one for 2018 is Greek. But if you teach the roots of these words, and now here's a test for us. How many of you can identify at least 5 of these for us? And Miss Overton will give you a prize, and you and I can talk about it, Miss Overton. Let me go back to the screen. Can anybody name these writing systems for us? Anybody? If you want to take a stab at them, anybody wants to just give a couple of them to us, shout them out, or even put them in the chat, feel free to do so. And I just wanted you to see the complexity of writing systems. But the one on the top, Riyadh Air is trying to push in soccer a lot. You see on Atletico Madrid, which is one of the top teams in Spain, they have this R, and it looks a lot like the R in Sanskrit. So for example, right before, below Riyadh Air, I've put an R. And if it loops to the left in Hindi and Marathi and Sanskrit, it's a short I. But you see that R in Riyadh Air, the R sound is actually mimicking this R from Sanskrit, and I'm just spooked by it and how similar it is. But yes, you would be right in guessing the source languages. So you have, this is Dhanyabad, but Dhanyabad in Hindi, Nepali, Maithili. The N here, when you see my cursor, is a half an N. The full N would look like the blue, but you chop up letters depending on how much you read of them. So you'll find minimal instances of dyslexia because one letter, one sound consistently. Telugu, you see the Sanskrit roots, Dhanya Vadalu, in Gujarati, Abhar, but you see a lot of similarities in the script to the Sanskrit Devanagari. Assamese, very similar to the Sanskrit roots. You can see that. And the Ge'ez script from East Africa, Amasaginalo in the Ge'ez script. Shukran Lakh is the Arabic word, but if it's said in Shukriya, same Arabic script, then Hebrew Tola. Hvala, which is in Bosnian Croatian, and then Mongolian, which is using the Cyrillic script, then Cantonese, which is Duo She, and then of course Sheshe in a Mandarin, which is the standard, and then Korean Gamsamnida, and then Teşekkür ederim from Azerbaijani and Turkish, and of course Echaristor in Greek. So we see the different scripts. And so here the different writing scripts are going to produce different reading outcomes. That is the question I'm asking, and I'm answering it yes. Depends on the shape, the complexity, the directionality, the spacing, visual complexity. We need to think about that. And my point here being, you need to introduce children to lowercase first, not uppercase. And even in the world of advertising and technical writing, we propose that. And so these are some things to think about. So there are phonetic versus relatively less phonetic writing systems. English is not a phonetic writing system. There are more exceptions. So we have 26 letters, but they can make up to 60 sounds depending on your accent. So we have a big problem. That's why we need to really help students learn the different sounds and maybe even create alphabets that might be even phonetic alphabets for the missing sounds. So when I teach ESL students, for example, this is how I do it. I write, and I'm going to stop sharing for a second just to draw your attention to this. So when I say write the way you hear it, so schedule, for example, this is how you will put it in parentheses, yeah? Jewel. And this is how you would remember it. So I write the phonetic spellings next to the word so that they remember it. Because same thing with apple, it's going to look like apple to most students, right? And so we need to teach a phonetic system of writing for students, and maybe even put sticky notes in books to help students along, to use the phonetics to get to. So I taught my children beautiful by teaching them beau first. So we started with beau, and beau is the word in French. So we went from beau to beautiful. And that's how they recognize the root. And they would look for the root in words. So I would use an etymological of some from beau to beautiful. So then you will remember the spelling because you know beau is the French root and full of beauty, full of beauty. The suffixes are mathematically positioned to help you out. And so if we do that, we have a lot more success. We also have to keep it real so students feel the message. So it's not just I hear you, but I feel you, relatability. There's a lot of disconnectedness visually in pictures, length, syntactic obstacles. Contractions are very hard to read. I have pictures and videos that show that it's a lot more complicated. We should not, we have students reading contractions like I am instead of I'm, because it's a lot harder to put together contractions. So we shouldn't be using contractions until like fourth or fifth grade. And so yet informal language is what we're pushing. So we see this disconnect. And punctuation, obviously research shows that it does make an impact. And so finally, we need to think about some of these things and use books that are relatable, bilingual, that use spellings that reflect the intonations around us. And these are some of the problems with English. So for example, there are 10 spellings for the E sound, leap, people, look at that. And then there are 11 spellings for the U sound. So rather than saying long and short, we really need to think of other ways of teaching this. Here are some of the reading theories. And the gaps are that most of them overlook phrases, sentences, and language functions. And if you don't do, and sounds, like sounds is meaning. And if you do that and look and include all of them, this is the closest and the only one that really captures some of these other missing elements. This is from an article in 2022, a chapter in this book. And this is the only one that really is more comprehensive. And so there might be a role for video gaming in building, for example, students' knowledge of reading. For example, students have alerted me to, and Avion is here. He was the one who said that the codes could be entry points for vocabulary. Teachers need to learn how to produce sounds and where in the mouth. So vowels do not make any contact. The tongue does not make any contact. It's just gliding like a gymnast, and understanding where these sounds are produced so we can guide students. And diphthongs is one vowel moving to another position in the mouth. So if you can guide children to track their tongues, they would have an easier time pronouncing and reading. And this is just a fun fact. The Phoenician alphabet, from which Arabic evolved, goes back 1050 BC. It had 22 consonants, so Arabic usually does not reflect the vowels like short vowels. But Yiddish, and Arabic and Hebrew all came from the Aramaic alphabet. The Greeks then adopted it around and adapted it around 600 BC. Then the Latin script adapted it further. The Greeks added the vowels. And then, of course, the problem is the phonetic inconsistency of English. But um, we see that if you pay attention to the source languages of these words, you will have a lot more traction. So audiobooks are very promising. Generative AI is promising. AI skimming is very useful for academic texts where we're taught to put the thesis first. Scanning, looking for the title, opening headings, abstracts could help. The words and idioms should be dissected at the outside. In logic and math and science, we need to talk about clauses. Sentences should be reviewed in the field specific content areas like physics versus sociology versus humanities in high school and middle school. Everything has to, the language of the content areas differs. So in science, we use passive voice. In the social sciences, we use active voice. So we need to think and teach reading in context and varied contexts. Synonyms should be elicited, synonymous ways of restating longer language, not just words. For example, stepping down, stepping up. This was a flyer that came home, and a high school ESL student was confounded. She said, "Am I stupid?" I said, "No, you're not stupid." She says, "I speak three languages, including Quechua and Mom, which are not written, at least not Mom. And yet I feel stupid when I speak in English, and I don't understand this flyer." I said, "It's because it uses idioms, so we need to all be aware of that." And we need to teach the history of English. We also need to look at how writing is used in our students' homes. Here's an example of writing in a Spanish-speaking multi-family home. So one apartment, five families or four families because of cost. Here, they'll put this in the bathroom. Writing is considered very, sort of, what's the word? Formal. So it's face saving. So if you have to clean the bathroom or put $20 towards cleaning supplies, rather than saying it, just put it in the bathroom. These are text messages from parents during COVID. Notice how the parents are spelling Spanish the way they hear it. So you see the literacy variations. Here is a washer that was fixed at the apartment, and the washer person, the tech, he left a bilingual note. Imagine, so smart. If we could do that, of course we would get a lot more traction. So I just want to say that as a parent, my kids, I like to keep three languages alive and I kept them out of preschool for a reason, so they would stay bilingual, because most of the preschools were only pushing English within 10 miles of me. So I would put lunchbox notes that were in three languages. And I was always pushing different languages. And that's why I want that to, I can tell you there's more traction because most of our students come from homes where other languages are spoken, and their reading success depends on teachers and principals like us who are going to bilingualize and scriptize the reading to make it really come to life. Thank you for your attention. Sorry that I exceeded the time limit. Any questions?
Thank you so much. Yes, we are open for questions. You can unmute yourself or you can place your questions in the chat. Any questions?
Any questions? Sorry that I ran over. I didn't see the chat because I was talking with share screen. I couldn't see the chat.
That's okay.
So I owe you 7 minutes of my time in
No
the future.
worries.
All right. So if there are no questions, you can always email us questions by sending them to anita.pandey@morgan.edu. And I'll just stay in case anybody has questions. Okay.